All right. Well, welcome everyone. It's great to see everybody here today. We may have a few other people joining us as we go through, but welcome to Cultivating Empathy, Trust, and Optimism Strategies for Motivating Demotivated Library Teams. My name is Christine Krieger, and I'm the Professional Development Consultant for the Colorado State Library, and I will be your tech support for this session as well as helping to monitor chat as we move through. This session is being recorded, and we have also enabled captions that you should be able to turn on or off yourself down under the More button, um, so that if you need those for today, feel free to keep your video on or off as you feel comfortable, and we are going to ask that you remain muted until the open Q&A portion. So with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Carl, who is our facilitator for today.
Thanks, Christine. I just want to say before we begin the session and jump into the questions, I want to acknowledge that the content we're going to be going over can be a bit heavy and potentially depressing given the topic. So just as a heads up, some of the things we'll talk about are job satisfaction, low morale, constructive criticism of the profession, and negative workplace culture. So at any point, if you need to step away or just take a minute away from the session, just remember, as Christine said, it's being recorded, so you can always catch back up on it when you feel a bit more up to it at that time. The final thing that I want to leave you with is that the reason we're all here is because we want to make a difference. And so you each showed up because we all care about our coworkers, our patrons, and our communities. So trying to keep that in mind as we're going through some of these, that those are sort of the core things that we're all really focused on. I want to go through and introduce the panel, and I'll start off by myself. As I said, I'm the moderator. My name is Carl Pettit, he, him, his, and I'm the coordinator of cataloging and metadata services at the University of Denver. And I'm just going to go through and name off the individuals who are on the panel, and they can introduce themselves. So we'll start with Celine.
Yes. Hi, everyone. My name is Celine, she, her pronouns, and I'm the library manager for the North Boulder Library, which is part of the Boulder Public Library District.
You, Kate.
Hey, I'm Kate Crow. I'm the curator of special collections and archives at the University of Denver. Also she, her pronouns, which used to be in my little bio, and I don't know where they went, so I'm gonna go re-add them.
Zoom likes to update and change things on its own. Liz.
Hey all, my name is Liz House. I use she, her pronouns. I am a assistant supervisor at Arapahoe Library District, and I work at the Sheridan Library.
Megan.
Hi, my name is Megan Connolly. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the Access Services Librarian at the University of Denver.
You and Shannon.
Hi, everybody. I'm Shannon Tharp, and I use she, her pronouns. I've been the resource sharing and collection strategy librarian at University of Washington Libraries for about a month and a half now. And before that, I was collections and content management librarian at the University of Denver for nearly 7 years.
Thank you all very much. So for the format of this session, we'll be doing 8 pre-selected questions at the very beginning, and then we'll have some time at the end to answer questions from the larger group here as well. So in the meantime, if you have a question, feel free to add it to the chat box, and Christine will be gathering those for that particular time at the end. So we'll jump into the first questions that we have here so that we can give as much time as possible to those. The first question we have for this session is, what are some common signs and indicators that a team is demotivated? And how can leaders identify these signs early on?
I can go first. So definite signs, not performing great customer service like they normally would, looking at their phone screens instead of interacting with patrons, forgetfulness and excuses about completing projects or being on time. Some people in my experience have definitely been late for shifts, and we really try not to encourage that if we can. And then not really wanting to collaborate or have meaningful interactions with their fellow coworkers.
I would say I would agree with, and I actually had written down some of what Liz mentioned. But I think also like being mindful that it will depend on your team, and everybody will manifest this a little bit differently. So some people might withdraw, people might be really vocal, although if you're the manager of a demotivated team, they may not be vocal at you. I think also like there's some obvious kind of demographic signs, like there's a high turnover rate. That's not great. Also, if your organization is doing any kind of surveys of employee satisfaction, those are, I mean, can be great tools. Also like people crying in the bathroom is not a great sign. People crying in their offices is not a great sign. And I think also just being mindful that sometimes, it's not necessarily an overarching like departmental demotivation. Sometimes people are just going through stuff like their dad is sick, their spouse is sick, their kid is sick, they're sick. Like life stuff happens. So sometimes it may not be workplace related. And sometimes people are just going through things and that may kind of carry over into the workplace, but it may not be related to the work itself.
Thanks. Was there anybody else from the panel that wanted to chime in? All right. The second question we wanted to go over was reflect on a time when you were part of a demotivated team. What were the key factors that contributed to the team's lack of motivation? Celine or Shannon, you want to lead things off with that?
Yeah, I'm happy to start. Yeah, I think unfortunately it's not uncommon for people to be part of a demotivated team at one point or another. I think it happens across all industries, library or otherwise. So it's definitely happened to me before, and it's obviously not an ideal situation to be in. And in the specific time that I'm thinking of, I think one of the key factors that contributed to the demotivation of the team was at the leadership level. And so that was really hard because if you saw, in this case, the manager of that organization kind of demotivating people, putting them down, not being a team player, not doing a lot of their own work, it really just had this whole house of cards kind of effect where then the whole team is thinking like, well, if they're not doing their job, why should I? And that was a really hard situation. And it it's even harder too because with the power dynamic at play, if someone is your superior and they're the reason that the team is unmotivated, it's really hard to kind of lead up to them. And in that situation, it didn't end very well. I ended up leaving that organization, which was sad, but at the end of the day, it there is a point where if nothing changes, nothing changes. And yeah, I think it's important for us as librarians in particular and library workers to protect our mental health and our space. I think there's a lot of other things, we can do before leaving becomes the only option. But yeah, it's a hard situation when the demotivation is coming from the top.
And then did you want to share next?
Yeah, I'll follow up. Unfortunately, I've been a part of demotivated teams, I think in just about every workplace I've been a part of at one point or another. It doesn't mean it's that way from the start, right? It's good for a while, and then maybe it's not good. And I start to think, well, it's a feature of workplaces rather than a glitch. It's also an indictment on American work culture, I think. Some key factors that I can think of that have contributed to lack of motivation on teams that I've been a part of also stem from, I think, overarching systemic and leadership issues. Some of those key factors, in no particular order, that I can think of are lack of accountability on the part of leadership and across an organization, low and stagnant wages, increasing workloads coupled with unrealistic expectations, willful disregard of self-awareness among coworkers, a little bit of power hoarding or a lot of power hoarding, depending on where you are, and a real lack of imagination as far as organizational culture goes.
Shannon, I was gonna say a lot of what you just said. So I'm just gonna say like, libraries are a pink collar profession. Like we are subject to a lot of kind of historical factors that contribute to overall, I would say field level kind of lower wages because it's a service profession like nursing, teaching, librarianship. They tend to be overall lower compensated as fields. And so I think that again is like one of those structural factors that Shannon's alluding to. And I think like those kind of overarching systemic issues combined with leadership issues can be are like two of the, I would say, primary factors in kind of demotivated teams and demotivated workers. I think all of us are saying something similar, which is essentially that leadership, and by that I don't necessarily mean the person who is in a position of authority in the institution, but leadership as a present within the organization in terms of a strategic vision for the organization and ensuring that workers in the organization are making a living wage and have respect and dignity in the context of their jobs. If that's lacking, you will have a demotivated organization.
The next question is, how does workplace culture influence team motivation? And what steps can leaders take to create a positive and motivating work environment?
Yeah, so I can answer this one. So I definitely believe in a good working environment. Organizational environments, not so great. I really believe it depends on the individual team that you have direct contact with every day. I'm not saying that internal customer service through the organization is important. I really believe that is also needed, especially now and then. But if your team is doing well, obviously your patrons, your customers, your community is going to get what they need. I think the one thing that leaders need to start implementing is doing a growth mindset and showing that everything is not set in stone, accepting things that are going to change, right? At my organization, we seem to be changing things all the time. And it seems to be going very, very fast, but we don't really have that breath or, way to pause and like feel things out. It's just like, go, go, go. So instead of being depleted emotionally on that, we are like, okay, we're just going to see how it goes. And if it goes, great, way. And if not, it's going to change one way or another. So again, just creating that growth mindset, not catastrophizing things before they even happen, like, oh, this isn't going to work. Okay, well, why isn't it going to work? Like, question these things, have conversations. But on the flip side, try not to be overly positive, toxic, where, oh, it's going to be great and, things are working out. Well, no, that's why we asked for feedback. How is it actually going? We want to actually see what is happening on the ground instead of, what the higher ups have in their head. And then just being realistic. I have staff who come in and they're like, hey, I'm having a bad day. Here's why. Okay, great. Thank you for telling me that. Let me know if you need support and then provide that support to your staff members. I've been in situations in the past where I've gone to support to either my HR and higher ups and it did not turn out great. And I just felt really depleted. So in my leadership style, I really try not to do that. And again, just keep in the back of your head, things are always going to change.
Is there anybody else that wanted to respond?
Yeah, I was just had a few thoughts as you were talking, Liz. I think it's also just really important thinking about organizations really and literally putting their money where their mouth is. And, if you say that EDI is important to you, if you say that you want to increase wages, if you say you value the mental health of your employees, then how are you building that in structurally to your organization? How is HR helping with that? How does your professional development budget look? Like, what steps are you actively taking to hire and recruit a more diverse group of people? So I think and that's easier said than done, right? Like we all have limited budgets. We don't just have tons and tons of cash coming in, but I do think that it is important to look at those factors of success and really invest your time and money and energy into those on a leadership level and on an individual level as well.
Great, thank you. Our next question is, in your opinion, what role does effective communication play in motivating a demotivated team? And how can leaders improve communication to boost motivation?
All right. I think for myself and my team, what I've found has been most positive is being as transparent as possible in the ways that we can be transparent, and being honest of, this is an HR issue, this is something that I cannot share, this is what I can let you know, and letting them know that you're being as open as possible when you're able to. I think being honest, there's a lot of fear and uncertainty and doubt with what the university is doing at times, with what the, government is doing at times, and how it's impacting them. And just being honest of what can we do when the situation is not great to help each other, to be supportive, to encourage that communication. For myself and my staff, there's people in the library from 6:30 a.m. to midnight, 1 a.m. So they don't see each other at all service points. So having really effective communication and clear lines and channels of communication between our team as a whole, what can we do to keep encouraging that? We have not, fortunately, had too much in the way of like conflict management, but we do run into a lot of like wild rumors within the department, within the library, within the university. So really trying to create an approachable place where someone can come to you and like, hey, I heard this, and being able to like dispel that or let me find out what is actually going on has been really helpful for us in trying to really like mitigate rumors going around. Yes, Christine put in, when no information is available, people create their own stories, and they can be wild, from the library school is closing because it doesn't have, the accreditation, to people are losing their jobs because the university is doing budget cuts. People will certainly create their own stories, and there might be a grain of truth buried deep somewhere in there. But it can be hard, and it can be really confusing for people. So being direct and clear and transparent. I think for us too, being a very customer service forward service point, we have also really tried to set appropriate limits, and we've done things like creating documentation for if a patron is harassing staff at the desk, and what we can do, and really embolden the team to like, I cannot help you at this point. You can contact my supervisor, you can contact the on-call person, you can contact the librarian, but I am choosing to not serve you, and give people that power to just not take it. One of my staff once told me about how a patron threw a book at him, and then they checked that book out to them. And I was just kind of baffled that, they didn't feel that they had any way to not do what is technically their job, which is, giving people the material that they're requesting. So I think really trying to set good boundaries, be transparent, build the team up to, you are empowered and emboldened to do things if it makes you uncomfortable, if it makes one of the student staff uncomfortable. And just, keep encouraging them to have clear communication, to come to myself or my access services manager if they're running into things, and, having us create a good system within our department. We're starting to talk about like, what are our goals as a team? What is the culture that we want? What are our values in our department, and how we can support each other?
I have something I'd like to add on to that because I think like 100% to everything Megan just said. I think the other thing that I would say leadership can do to improve communication is to not be the bottleneck for communication, like to make sure that you are, if you are the person in a leadership role, whether you're a middle manager or at a very high level, like to encourage communication to happen that may not need to involve you, like to encourage people to communicate across, like if you're in an academic library, to encourage communication with people in other divisions, to make sure that you have relationships kind of with all different kinds of employees and all different kinds of places in the organization, which can, I think, like help with some of what Megan is alluding to with like wild rumors about whatever it is. And you can be like, no, I talked to somebody who was in this division that you're talking about, and based on the meeting that they had with their dean as a full faculty, this is what happened. So like, again, not that you need to be like the source of all of that information, although I like to be, I'm very nosy. Making sure that you as a leader are not the bottleneck to information and that you're not the sole kind of keeper of information. That's that kind of like power hoarding that I think Shannon was referring to, which it's not always intentional or malicious, but it is a problem when it happens.
Thank you. The next question is, how can leaders tailor motivational approaches to individual team members with different personalities, work styles, and preferences?
Yeah, so I would like to share two different approaches that we've recently implemented. So my supervisor actually didn't come from Libraryland. She came from a call center in Columbia, and she's definitely brought some new, fresh ideas to the team, which actually has been really well. So one thing that we started implementing during our quarterly conversations is giving the option of training time. So when I say training time, I'm not talking about regular staff training. I'm not talking about, learning how to do the catalog or learning how to do your IIL. This training time is just for them. So it can be used either for professional development or not. And it doesn't have to be library specific related. So some of the options that we've been giving to our staff members is like, hey, if you want to participate in this team programming and you want to learn how to crochet, great. Let's take an hour to do that. If you want to learn Spanish as a second language to help better patrons, scan, fax, or copy, great. Like, let's figure out a way to either find you a program or a conversation circle or a class that, can help you practice. So the only caveat with this is you have to use it or lose it. So what my supervisor does is if people actually use this training time, she just asks them to send a simple email and be like, hey, what are you learning? How did it go? Would you recommend it to other staff members? If you do recommend it, would you be willing to share it in this document? So other people, if they don't know what to do for their training time, they can access that document and see what their fellow coworkers are doing. So I think that's one great option. Another thing that she's also kind of implemented during our quarterly conversations is giving the staff of a choice of what they want to do for an assigned task. So for example, my library is a very small public library. We have a bunch of kiddos who come in after school and we love to decorate. We love to decorate throughout the seasons. A lot of my team doesn't like to decorate. I would love to decorate more, but I don't have any time. So, that's another option. Okay, if you don't want to be part of the decoration committee, can you be a liaison? Can you do something else? So really just giving staff something fun to do, something that I actually want to do. And I know realistically that can't be everywhere. But I think in the public library sphere, it is possible. And I think it just gives people that little touchstone to do something they actually love and be like, oh yeah, this is why I went to work in libraries in the first place.
Thank you. Our next question moving through is, discuss the importance of setting realistic and achievable goals for a demotivated team. How can leaders collaborate with team members to establish meaningful and motivating objectives?
I think for my team, what has been really helpful is finding a common purpose and finding kind of some easy sustainable, realistic goals to start with. For us in particular, things like emergency training and kind of safety are huge, and things that my staff really finds helpful and valuable. So setting goals around emergency training or updating our documentation, kind of small bites of a bigger thing have been a really great way to get people to buy in a little bit more and to feel that they're personally invested in it, that they have ownership in it. I think making sure you hear from the team to get their buy-in, especially in a way that doesn't burn anyone out, that it's not overburdening with work or adding additional tasks to people's already busy days, has been good. For us, we were really, SMART goals are great. For us, I started in Access as a staff before I became the Access librarian, and we were a really, really siloed department. Even within ourselves, my interlibrary loan unit, there was one person that did Prospector, there was one person that did ILL borrowing, and one person that did ILL lending, and they didn't know how to support each other because they were never trained to do that. So what we've really done in the last couple of years is look at how we can cross-train within the unit and support each other in small ways. Is it doing the prospector bin because they're really busy in ILL? Is it doing scanning for, yes, cross-training is sustainable and we love it in my department. And I think that's been it was really hard initially to get that buy-in, and people worry, again, with the worry and the rumors of like, if I don't do this, am I going to lose my job? And it's like, no. We are helping each other by doing a prospector bin or scanning for ILL or pulling books for stacks. We're all supporting each other for the same achievable goals and to make our workloads fair and balanced and equal to the extent that we can. ILL is going to be busier sometimes, and then course reserves will have a time where they're busier. And then we get toward the end of the year and finals, and our night staff's really busy. So it's really trying to find ways that we can support each other, share goals, share cross-training when we can. Things like that have been really valuable. And I think it helps a better communication within the team, that they're talking to each other about projects that are getting done, that they're getting a little bit more of the buy-in and feeling invested in doing like our annual pull to our offsite storage. Everyone does it, and we feel excited and motivated when we pull 6,000 items, things like that.
Great, thank you, Megan. Second to the last question is explore the impact of recognition and appreciation on team motivation. What specific actions can leaders take to acknowledge and reward the efforts of team members? You want to go first, Celine?
Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, I think there's so many ways to recognize and appreciate people on your team. And at the end of the day, I think everyone appreciates being recognized too, whether it's something small like, oh, I see you, took extra time to clean off that book, or, you created a whole new program or something like that. I think anything can be a recognizable achievement. And I believe in I believe in big recognitions and small recognitions as well, because I think the small recognitions are really just kind of like that daily motivation or weekly motivation to just kind of keep going and just to let people know that they are appreciated too, because I mean, our library would not run without the people who work here. They're the most important thing in the building. And so one of the other things too that I'm not above is good old fashioned like pizza or food to motivate people. I always try at our staff meetings to at least have some snacks or to just buy lunch for everyone. And I'm grateful that our budget allows for us to do something like that. But even without motivating people with food, I think, I always try in my every other week one-on-ones with people to just call out one specific thing that they've done. And that's nice because some people don't feel comfortable with a big recognition with the whole team. And it's important to know that ahead of time as well. And so, yeah, I usually try to just one-on-one call something out that's been really positive. And then if they feel comfortable with a larger group share out, I always try to do that as well and to spread it around the whole team so that other people on the team, especially folks who don't usually work together, whose schedules don't overlap, that they can also see what other people are doing and how they're being recognized.
Yes, I can also speak to our team being very food motivated. Um,
It
we
sound
love our
right.
food here. We do potlucks and all that fun stuff, so it's definitely a good time. We ironically started a staff appreciation board, just like a cutesy little school board in the back. And my team, we're not really big on a lot of huge recognition. So what we've been doing is just like an anonymous survey at the very beginning of our staff meetings each month, just calling out, oh, hey, like this one team member did this, or hey, I saw someone do that. And it was like really cool how they helped that patron. And it's actually been going very well. Another thing that we are trying to do is if we do see like excellent customer service, we let them pick the lunch for the week, or we actually try to give them admin hours as much as we can. We feel that mental health days and that work-life balance is very important. And then yeah, I'm just like, hey, do you want to do this as an idea? Okay, great. Like, let's work on these goals, and then if they reach those goals, we'll have a little celebration. So
I have one other thing that you all made me think of. So I'm an academic library kind of nepo baby. My dad's an academic library dean. And one of the things that he told me at one point, because someone was sort of like trying to puff him up, and I think maybe trying to get him to like butter him up to get him to do something, and to like say like, oh, administrators are so great. And he was like, the workers turn the library on. I don't. Like, so I think just being mindful that like sometimes recognition is recognizing what part of this is not you, and to make sure that like that there's an acknowledgement of the team as a whole, but also of the people who are doing a lot of the on the ground work, that they know how important that work is.
To tack on to all of this, something that I tried to keep in mind, because I've always been housed within the technical services realm of libraries, even though we're all working toward public services at the end of the day, right? We're all working toward a common goal. I think sometimes tech services work gets really short shrift and is just labeled or rendered invisible, right? Because people can't necessarily see it all the time. I don't even like using the word invisible there because it really isn't. But, just normalizing, if people are okay with this, like the folks who I would supervise saying like acquisitions, went through and processed X number of books that were added to our collection. Or that came into our collection over this past month in a collection management meeting with selectors and folks like Kate and Carl and administrators there, to let them know that like these people are doing a ton of work day in and day out to, really solidify the foundation of the library and be a great coworker to you. I think we need to continue to normalize that, because routinely as a supervisor in tech services, I would hear from folks that they felt underappreciated. So.
Thank you all. For our last question for this part of the session is, what steps can leaders take to address and alleviate sources of stress and burnout within the team? And how does managing workload and expectations contribute to motivation?
Yeah, I can start on that. Again, I think about the system as a whole really supporting that. In my organization, we have sick time for everyone, but it's pretty liberally applied. And so it's very supported and recognized and very much okay for people to use their sick time for mental health days. It's very normalized in our work culture. It's something that I've taken them myself. I've told my team that I'm taking them myself. And I think it's just a really nice way to like recognize that everyone needs that no matter what is going on in your life. And I think, that definitely helps. Another thing that we're doing is offering every library specialist a work from home day per month. And that's, whether you're 20, 30, or 40 hours as a library specialist, you get a work from home day. And it's just a nice day to just be home. We have staff laptops and headsets so they can work the remote call center for a few hours, but also just kind of use that time to do trainings, work on projects, really anything they want. And that's been a really successful program to just kind of give people that extra day to just, kind of chill and breathe and be home. And I think in terms of managing workload and expectations, we kind of mentioned it earlier, but I think Liz, you were kind of talking about a growth mindset and this idea that like, yes, we're trying something and hopefully it works, but if it doesn't, that's okay. And I've definitely had times in my organization where folks might have a really ambitious workload and they're really motivated and they're super excited about it. And then something in their life happens and they're just unable to achieve that and work at that level for a long time. And it just becomes unsustainable for them. And in those situations, I think it's really key for leaders, managers, kind of anyone who can adapt to be able to just adapt to those expectations. And, at the end of the day, we're a public library. We offer amazing free programs, but it's just books, obviously it's more than just books, but it's not worth sacrificing the mental health of our workers in order to just crank out program after program after program. And I think it's important to be adaptable and flexible to make sure that folks are still feeling like they're operating at a sustainable level for them.
To continue some of what Celine was saying, I think from a supervisory perspective, consistent check-ins with the folks you supervise and check-ins that offer time and space for individual team members to talk through what they need are key. And sometimes you might have to have those more frequently, depending on what is going on in the world, in the library, whether it's public library, academic, and you can adjust as need be. But within those check-ins and conversations, plotting out what projects might need to wait, and then deciding what responsibilities take priority in the immediate scheme of things can be helpful in structuring and pacing the day-to-day for individual team members. I also think as a leader or a supervisor that your ability to say no and draw boundaries on behalf of your team is critical. So when your team already has 5 projects going on and your supervisor or director or whoever comes to you with another idea for a project to add on, the space as a leader or supervisor for you to say, well, maybe we can do that, but these other 2 projects that are already in the works are going to have to wait, or being able to just firewall and say no on behalf of an individual team member goes a really long way in managing workload and expectations. And I know that that can be tricky depending on the context that you're situated in your organization and depending on work culture in your own organization. But the people that you lead and supervise need to hear and know that you're advocating for them. They can advocate for themselves too, but when there are power dynamics at play, I think knowing that your supervisor is doing what they can to protect your time and space is crucial.
Thank you all for the thoughtful responses to those questions. What we want to do now is move into a time where the broader audience can submit questions. So if you have anything that you'd like to ask to get some ideas bouncing off the wall, whatever that is, feel free to put that into the question. Also, particularly if some of this stuff I know might hit home, closer to home for some than others. If you're into that kind of environment right now, feel free to take a break, get up and move around, whatever you need to do to sort of step away from the moment. But we do have one question that we can start with, which I think sort of builds off what Celine and Shannon were talking about. From Beth, what advice do you have for crafting effective one-on-ones that are motivating and supportive? Of course, anybody can chime in.
I think
think-
having sorry.
Oh,
do you
go
wanna-
ahead, Liz.
Okay, sorry. I think having some sort of agenda or document beforehand, just to share with that team member, hey, this is what we're going to talk about. Do you want to bring anything to my attention? And what we've been doing is we've been breaking it down. So like, here are your expectations, right? Okay, so we're going to talk about these. And then we're going to talk about your assigned task and your goals. Like, what are your goals this quarter? Did you achieve those goals? Okay, if not, why not? Do you need any support? So I think, again, just opening up that conversation and not blindsiding people beforehand is very important.
Yeah, agreed. I'm a huge believer that a meeting without an agenda is not a meeting. So it doesn't need to be a super structured agenda, but there does need to be a structure. So like, again, going back to if that person has specific goals that have been outlined, ideally not, unless there are some pretty serious issues happening, not making it entirely focused around like, how are you doing with this goal? Because that can be kind of overwhelming depending on the person. But making sure that there is a structure there, that the person comes into the meeting knowing what to expect. It is anathema to me to be like, hey, do you have a minute to chat? Like, I don't ever want to be that person who's like, their staff lives in fear of like, hey, do you have a minute to chat? And then like, you don't, and it's a week later and you don't know what the person's going to have to talk to you about. So like, that's the other reason for a check-in is that there is a defined saved, not safe space for you to have conversations about potential issues as they arise, how the person's doing, either on their goals or if there's anything that needs to be adjusted, so that you don't have to send the like, hey, can we check in? And then like they're live in fear for a week, which is like the worst.
So we're having some discussion on one-on-ones, but I want to back up real quick to a question that I lost. Talking about in a team, sometimes there can be like a little bit of internal conflict between people who feel overburdened and overextended and other people who like are really ready to do like everything to meet the patrons' needs. And this question is coming from somebody who's in an outreach department. So just kind of curious how people are balancing that.
Yeah, and I had kind of put a response in the chat. I'm wondering if like any kind of cross training is an option so that the folks who are really motivated can come and help the people out who are doing outreach and who are feeling a little overburdened, to really offer both people support and kind of get both people's needs met. For the folks who are really feeling motivated to be out in the community, they can do a ride along, they can see what it's like, they can kind of get that on the ground experience. And then the folks who are maybe feeling a little overburdened can just have a little bit of extra support and know that someone else is able to kind of help them out if they need to. I know that might place more burden on the person doing the outreach if they are then tasked with like training or showing someone else how to do their job. But yeah, that was just one solution that came to my mind.
Any other thoughts on that balance?
Not that specifically, but I do, like, I know there's other questions in the chat, and I noticed that Lauren had asked a question about unionization, and Shannon moved from a non-union place to a union place, so she's maybe uniquely placed to talk about the distinctions.
Let me take a look at that question. I did see that pass by. Before we get to that, though, I see that Monica has a question about to the last couple of us. It's to me and Celine. How often do you have one-on-ones with folks? When I was supervising folks, I had biweekly check-in meetings for one-on-ones with people, and I would set those for an hour. And build enough time around that so that if we ran a little bit over time, that was okay. I also tried hard to keep those things to an hour for the sake of, you know, my own boundaries and time as well, but an hour biweekly. Let me look at the unionization question. And I would remind you that I've been at my current role for a month and a half. So I may not have all the answers here. What I can tell you about moving, I guess, from a non-unionized place to a unionized place is that the University of Washington libraries themselves organized and unionized a couple years ago, but really like this last kind of biennium was the first biennium in which they were unionized. And they unionized basically online throughout COVID, which I think is incredible. And I don't know how people did not get completely burned out by trying to do that alone. So many props to my colleagues here for getting that done. And now I'm getting to, I guess, enjoy some of those efforts and I'm joining them. But with the unionization, there is an element of like, here, I think that managers or supervisors, if you have a manager or supervisor role in the libraries, I'm not sure that you can be a part of the union. There's a rule there, right? And because something gets complicated, I'm gonna have to investigate that further. I'm still learning these things. And our union right now is in the middle of, you know, negotiating possible raises for the next biennium, which of course the state of Washington, like every other state, is in its like forced austerity mode, saying that they have a debt of billions of dollars to deal with, and that's probably going to get passed on to a lot of the educational institutions in the state, the way things work here. With unionization, as far as like motivation goes and teams go, we have an associated, you know, librarians group at UW. And you don't even need to be in the union to be a part of that. But I just got out of a meeting before I came into this panel on vanishing government information and what we are seeing across the university libraries here in relation to that topic, right? And there are hundreds of us here. So having a space like that where we can say, how are we going to get together and do some of this work together and even talk about how we're coping or not coping together in this space has been helpful. So, you know, there's a little bit of an element of like work toward really high level communication because there are so many of us. And then, you know, working toward negotiating better salaries and pay for everyone who works in the libraries. But I still have to get a little clear on the whole supervisor manager part of things with the union. I don't know if that rings similar to those of you who may be in union backed positions at this point, but that's what I'm seeing and hearing.
Thank you for that. A couple other comments in chat, and I will just mention that, excuse me, chat will not be part of the archive. So if other people have thoughts that they would like to share more privately, feel free to do that via the chat as well. Any other questions from participants or the audience, I should say? If not, we have a couple more that we can address that we kind of pre-arranged, but we want to make sure that people get their questions answered. And if for some reason I missed one from you, pop it back in chat. We had some good conversation going, so.
Rick had one a bit ago that was about like balancing kind of different levels of wanting to provide a certain like level of quote unquote level of service, which I don't want to say like good or bad, but like putting more energy into a particular area when other team members feel overburdened and how to manage that, which I thought was a great question.
Yep, and we touched on it a little bit, but if others have some that they would like to share. And also Rick just, excuse me, shared a template for a one-on-one agenda. If people want to grab that out of chat, you may do that as well.
Fantastic. I mean, so the only thing I was going to say about that, since I did bring up the question, is I will say that like every team dynamic is different and some of it depends on what your team dynamic is and how you're going to have that conversation. If you have a relatively free-flowing conversational department or unit or whatever it is that's having this kind of internal conflict, ideally it's something that you can, through a facilitated conversation in a department meeting or maybe multiple meetings, hash out amongst yourselves. It's really challenging when, especially if, again, maybe I'm intuiting or reading more into the question than is there, but if you have one person on the team who has an opinion about how someone else should be doing their job when they're not that person's supervisor, that I think is something that like that's a reason that like those biweekly one-on-one check-ins are so important, because that can be, again, like Megan's spoken to boundaries. I think some of other of us have. Like, it's not to say that like you shouldn't be able to comment on your coworkers if they're impacting your ability to do your work. Like, absolutely bring that up. But if it's not impacting your work and it's not affecting the workplace dynamics and it's just that that person is really focused on what someone else is doing, that I would say is another area where like ideally you as a leader need to like work with that person on maybe redirecting some of that energy back toward their own job. My 2 cents.
Thank you.
Ooh, damn me. Ooh, that's a
You're up. I was just gonna say I can read it off so that you can all take a minute to think about it. But Tammy just asked, what is the best way to address a staff member who feels like they are doing the best job ever, but they are really bringing the rest of the team down?
I can maybe start with that because I've had a situation with that recently, and it is real tricky. It's a really hard situation because obviously you want people to be motivated, you want them to feel like they're doing a great job, but there can definitely be a difference sometimes between actions and consequences and how people perceive you. Um, I had this, like I said, kind of happen recently, and it had come to my attention that one person was acting in a way that made other people on the team just not respond very well. And my approach to that conversation with the team member in question was kind of just addressing it in the sense of like, I see you doing this, and I'm giving you the benefit of the doubt that I don't think you realize how this is coming off, and just kind of gently bringing that awareness to them of like, when you say this, I think, I trust that you're trying to help. I trust that you're trying to, collaborate with your team members. However, it does come across this way, and some folks aren't really responding well to it. And yeah, it's been an ongoing conversation within our team. And yeah, I'd love if anyone else has any other like better ways to address that because it's really tricky.
I had something similar with a colleague a while back, and same thing, just kind of sat down and had a conversation, and I gently said, hey, I don't think you realize this, but here's the very specific example that, happened between us, and this is how it made me feel. Or, just kind of like gently bringing it up where it doesn't feel disheartening or like blaming in a sense. And like don't expect an apology, don't, because they might not even be aware, right? So just give them time to think. And then I always ask, do you want to have a follow-up conversation later? Do you want to process this? And give them the option to just take that time, because again, some people just don't realize it. But yeah, it's definitely a very difficult situation.
think the only other thing that I would say, and this is, I think, maybe more relevant to it if this is happening in like a personal situation rather than a workplace situation where you are the supervisor and you're witnessing this kind of behavior with your direct reports, is what I usually will try and find a way to do, if it's at all possible, is to say, is there any way that you would feel comfortable having that conversation with this person who is exhibiting this behavior that's troubling to you in some way? And like sometimes that is not at all what will work or is appropriate depending on the like level of escalation that the situation's at. But if it's like this person is doing this thing that bugs me, like tell them. Like if it's just like this bugs me, like it bugs me that you're, I don't know, eating food really loud next to my desk for 10 minutes in the morning, like, you know, or like, is there a strategy that you can use to, you know, go eat your breakfast somewhere else so that you're not, you know, loudly eating Cheerios next to someone while they're trying to, you know, get ready for the day or whatever it is. Because so if it's like a relatively low level thing, just encouraging people to directly and kindly address it with the person directly so that you're not triangulating, that you're not like becoming a go-between, because that can create even more issues. I will say that if it's a more like medium to high level, like this person is doing something harmful, then obviously, yes, you do need to intervene as a manager. But like if it's a low level, like this person is doing this thing that bugs me, just encouraging the person who's being bugged to like, you know, say something to the person that's kind and like offer to practice with them, offer to have a conversation. Like direct communication is best often.
Other questions from the larger audience they'd like in the last few minutes?
Well, if you do have questions, feel free to pop them in the chat. We do still have a couple minutes left, but in the meantime, I really want to thank all of our panelists for agreeing to share with us today. And I want to thank all of the attendees who joined us today, asked some great questions. There was a lot of great conversation between people in the chat, which was wonderful. The recording will hopefully be available by tomorrow, and I will email everybody who registered a link to the archive when it is ready. Feel free to share it with other people. It's kind of open access, kind of from wherever you are. I'm also going to include a link to an anonymous survey where you can share your thoughts about today's panel. And then also, if you're going to need a certificate, you can also just respond directly to that email. It'll come back to me, and I'm happy to send you a certificate if that is needed also. So I'm just double checking chat. And I don't think I see any other questions. So once again, I want to thank Carl for helping be our moderator today, all of the panelists for sharing their thoughts and ideas. And I really wish everybody a great rest of your afternoon.
Thanks so much for having us, everyone. Take care.